Hello and welcome. I'm Vanessa Roberts, and this is the Power of Technology series on Federal News Network. Today we're going to be talking about why and how agencies must evolve from a network posture to a security posture, and what that means relative to zero trust. Our guests are Tony Celeste. He's the Executive Director and General Manager for Ingram Micro Public Sector, and Don Bailey. Don is the Senior Enterprise Solutions Architect at VMware. So glad to have you guys both here in the studio today. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here with you too.
It's great to see you both. So let's kick this off today with a little bit of level setting about where agencies are in their journey to a new cyber landscape, right? They're trying to get to this new cyber world built on a zero trust architecture, but talk about where they really are, Don, based on kind of where your experiences have been with agencies.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question to start with. I was actually reading a industry report just the other day, and the federal government is actually a little bit ahead of the private sector in implementing zero trust. I think that is attributed for the most part for the fact that there's an executive order and there's these mandates out to do that. According to this report, 72% of the government has already started implementing zero trust. We're only about 56% in the private sector. So overall, I think the government's in a pretty good shape, but there's a lot to do. Right. It's highly complex, and it's not easy, but there are facilities and folks out there to help with that journey.
So, Tony, one of the things that has come up a lot is that there's 5 pillars, right? We have 5 pillars under the zero trust framework, but there's been a lot of focus on identity access management. Why is it critical to start thinking a little bit beyond that and thinking maybe not so sequentially about the pillars?
Yeah, I think, Vanessa, when we look at access and identity, we can't limit ourselves to just there. The rationale behind it is the complexity of the solutions has dramatically changed as a result of the disaggregation of technology, and then you start applying what happened post-pandemic with the influx of the changing dynamic of where people are working from, the tools that they're using, the increase in collaborative tools, the volume under the Internet of Things. So all of those things have come together and resulted in an increase in the speed of innovation and in adoption. And then, of course, the other critical component that you need to look at is the person, the individual, how we use that technology. And probably the biggest threat is us to ourselves, the insider threat. And so we'll get the chance to probably talk a little more about that later.
So let's talk about that, Don, too, a little more about what you're seeing with agencies. There has been a lot of focus, importantly, even as you mentioned it, identity and the individual. But that access management piece has really, I think, driven most of the conversations over the past year. Maybe talk about how there is the reality. I think every agency knows it's perimeterless now. There's not some network perimeter. So you have to move away from that idea of like the network posture to a broader security posture, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The thing is, there are more than just, there's more to zero trust than just that first pillar. There are 5, as you pointed out, and in some architectures like NSA and DISA, there's 7 pillars, but they're essentially the same, right? And so identity, of course, was the first one people took a look at because that's all critical. Controlling access to your resources is critical, but there are the other pieces. And so it's important to start focusing on the other pieces in conjunction with the identity piece. For example, in the DISA NSA reference architecture for zero trust, they emphasize, and we at VMware also emphasize when we're talking to our government customers, focusing initially on automation and analytic visibility, network visibility, and analytics. Those 2 pillars are the foundation of the rest of it, and so we generally start a conversation with our customers in the government on focusing on that. Because honestly, as you pointed out, identity has been a focus, and they've got a pretty good handle on that. Now it's time to start looking at automation and analytics and visibility.
And as a follow-up to that, is that a conversation that agencies are excited about when you're talking to IT and security teams? Are they on the same page too? And are they also seeing that need, that automation need?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, most of our customers in the federal space already have some form of automation implemented. They're not fully implemented, and that's where we talk to them. The thing about it is, every customer is different. Everybody's journey to zero trust is going to be different. And so it really starts with a self-assessment, and we, VMware, can assist with that assessment as well as others. They need to assess where they are. The management leadership needs to determine, what do we want this network or this infrastructure to look like and be capable of it when we're done? And then sort of map the two together and see where are the gaps and how do we get from here to there.
Tony, why do you think that's so critical right now? And is that something that when you're out talking with customers, you're also hearing that? I think one of the things that we've heard agencies say is that they realize when they start to analyze and look at what they've already done, they have done some of the things, but there are those gaps.
Yeah,
You know?
I think the gaps are created for a number of reasons. They're not addressing a fixed problem. So if we look at the advancements of technology, the rapid innovation occurring, the pandemic was a great example because what exploded was the use of collaboration tools. But what also changed is the infrastructure. They no longer had control over the entire infrastructure. If everybody's working inside their own perimeter, they control all those pieces and parts. They don't externally. So as we've seen this, it's how do they put their arms around it, right? They still have a mission to get done. They got a workforce that if they can't get their job done, they're going to push to find workarounds. And so the big challenge is not just on a policy basis, but the advocacy and the adoption and the change in mindset that it's everybody's responsibility. So the government recognizes that they need to secure their environments, but they also recognize they need to strike a balance with getting the mission done. And then that threat profile is changing because as innovation continues, right, every tool that's out there in history, right, has a good purpose and a bad purpose. And it's how you choose to use that tool. So that tool, that new innovation, which can, be used to secure an environment, could also, inversely, the other side of that, it could be used to exploit a vulnerability. So that's what they're wrestling with, and that's why it's such a big challenge.
And also, isn't one of the challenges for government is you have to do all this while you're flying the plane. I mean, none of these services can actually stop, even most of them, even temporarily. Talk to that, and just that I think actually talks to that real need for visibility, right? Because you have to always be working on something and evolving it and worrying about the outsider threat and trying to achieve the next level, correct?
Yeah, that's a really tough problem, and it's one that the government agencies that I deal with struggle with. What a lot of them are doing, I think, successfully is they're taking hardware refresh cycles and they're maintaining their legacy systems, taking the new hardware, building that up almost in a parallel sense, but with newer technology, Kubernetes, things like that, where they can manage change dynamically in the network when they need to. And then once they have those stood up and going, then it's a matter of transitioning over. Then it becomes a matter of moving workloads, which is another problem in and of itself. But that's an issue, but that's how agencies are getting around that.
And are you also seeing that cloud is really helping with that? You talked about Kubernetes, but just that idea that you can do smaller pieces and slowly build.
Yes, cloud does help, but the federal government has unique requirements around security. So, it has to be a cloud that is secure, like GovCloud or, MilCloud or MilCloud 2, and those that have come behind it. Stratus is the replacement for that. And some of the others like AWS does have a federal, cloud for security. And so those systems are cloud for sure, and it certainly can help, but they're a little bit different than the cloud that's the public uses. Right. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of the technologies that you can use and that are available to be used and what you need in these secure environments. But that's a long way to answer that. Yes, cloud helps a lot, but it also introduces some other complexities.
Yeah, I think we look at it from the perspective is cloud is innovative and it's enabling the more rapid deployment or prototyping of new solutions. But it's also changing the workflows and how data is moving around, which then you've got to address in your policies and in your guidance and in the protocols. And so when we look at this, we advise that organizations look to places like NIST. I mean, we've had the executive orders, we've got the guidance coming out of OMB, you've got CISA providing a fundamental foundation of the things organizations need to be looking at. But ultimately, we're starting, when you're developing any new solution, with security in mind and architecting it in, building it in, no longer is bolting it on after the fact going to be acceptable. So you want to draw on the guidelines from the National Institutes of Standard and Technology, from the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, and incorporate those into these new solutions right from the ground up.
You said something very important there, Tony, and you mentioned data, securing the data. And Zero Trust really is all about becoming more data-centric, a view of protecting the data, and that's absolutely critical notion.
Right, well, the data is ultimately the crown jewels.
Yeah, it is.
Right. We were really talking about security, posture, and the New World Order, which is there are no perimeters in the government anymore. There's no network perimeter. People are located all over the country, all over the world, coming into these systems. So let's talk about what are some of the obstacles, the challenges, how we can overcome them in the government, but also what are the opportunities that are available? Who wants to go in?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a huge opportunity, right? I think the first and foremost, the opportunity begins with a change in mindset. And to change that mindset that everybody has an ownership stake in securing and protecting information, whether it be for your company or be the government agency and or the highest levels, our national security. It's making sure that everybody is playing a role in it. And the insider threat, whether intentional or unintentional, is probably one of the biggest areas we have to focus on in this space. Just quote some numbers, and I don't want to get them wrong. Forrester Research just did it. 74% of companies see insider threat as their greatest concern. 82% of the decision makers are focused on protecting the data. And there's a shift to move towards being more proactive versus reactive. And that these insiders often pose the greatest threat. And again, I'm restating something I had just said earlier, whether it's unintentional or intentional. And so predictive technologies is an opportunity there. Things like machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to be able to analyze these vast amounts of data. I mean, Don was talking earlier about the importance of visibility and analytics and how to incorporate that with the 5 pillars. And that would then be one of the moving towards that seventh pillar, that analytics, but that generates even more information. So how do you sift through what's meaningful and important? How do you do it in a predictive way that provides that level of confidence? I think that's really important, and that leads to policy and guidelines. It leads to taking into consideration the mission and making sure that's still getting done. So that means whatever it is you're doing from security needs to be easy to use. You can't have people having to think about it, because that gets in the way with delivering the mission, and they'll find a workaround. That'll create a vulnerability. And then the other opportunity, besides education and training, is continuing to reduce the complexities of the technology solutions that we are utilizing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say what he said, right? And so I would like to touch on 2 points, and excellent points that you made there, Tony. Sort of bring it back to, we've focused a lot on identity management. Well, if you've got an insider threat, they've just circumvented the identity management system totally. And so it's really important that we focus on things other than identity management. The notion of incorporating artificial intelligence in your visibility and in your automation tools and in your network remediation tools for security and endpoint protection and things like that is absolutely critical. In fact, a lot of the products that VMware has right now is using AI to do that network analysis and remediation. And so that's critical, and it also ties into the opportunities piece. So if you're going to go ahead, and you need to anyway, re-architect your systems to become zero trust, you may as well take the opportunity to also make them cloud native and modern applications as well. And so that really sort of brings it all together, and everything, Tony, that you just said comes right along with that.
Yeah, I think we often use the term, modernize. And when we look at just modernizing the technology, it's cheaper, faster, more compact, maybe more reliable. But we will also have to incorporate, right? We have to transform how we're using it in the delivery of the mission. Because if we don't transform, then basically we could just be automating a bad process. Right?
Right.
Yeah. We're accelerating the speed at which an adversary or a threat can get access to the data we're trying to protect, and we don't want to do that. So we have to, transform along with that technology.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I say modernization, I'm thinking more in terms of things like Kubernetes, cloud native, and being able to update components of systems, not the entire system, but components, a function, update that at runtime, and your end users, have no idea that you've just swapped out, that function for a better version of it. And so when I say modernize, I mean more in the context of cloud native and Kubernetes, implementing these new ways of doing things that are really sort of been the driving force behind zero trust in the very beginning, because it's all about getting to the cloud, moving to the cloud. Your perimeter disappears at that point, and that's why perimeter is not as important as it once was.
Right. You guys both touched on the idea too of sort of like the friction factor, right? And maybe talk to that a little bit, Don, and how you guys are addressing that with agencies. That idea of customer experience, it's got the two sides, right? The one side is the internal government employee who's doing all this work and trying to provide all these services and also address security and the data issues. And then you have the public-facing piece of it, where you have to make sure that these things are usable by the public, and that the friction isn't so much that one, there's a workaround that creates the security gap, or two, people just can't get the service they need.
Yeah. And Tony again touched on this earlier when we talked about people, processes, and technologies. And so we as technologists and folks who are involved with the government, helping them along this journey, need to make sure that we and the government continually focuses on, people, processes, and technologies along the way, so that you don't end up with a system that's very, functional but not very efficient in terms of user interfaces. VMware is focused on, the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure. And so we really focus on making that intuitive. It's an integrated stack, which means we can manage it from an intuitive and very familiar interface, vCenter Server or some of the other applications. And so that's, step one is to make sure you're always having in mind the people, processes, and technologies, not just the technology, but also making sure that you're doing the right thing at every step of the way.
Which that really gets to what it's the transformation factor, right? Versus
Yeah.
a modernization factor.
Right.
Well, we're almost at the end of our time, but before we go, is there any last comments that you guys would like to make?
Well, I'll start off. I think one area we didn't dive into and is going to be top of mind for most folks today is supply chain risk management, and then specifically in the area of software, SBOMs and these software bill of materials and authenticating where the code and the pieces of code that are being in operation and in use. And so while we dealt a whole lot with procedural things and policies, it's really important that the components and the innovation that we are instilling in these new solutions have all been properly vetted, right? This goes back to architected in, built in. So you've got to go down to every component, every widget that sits in the solution and make sure it's viable, because, hey, the bad actors out there are very sophisticated in what they try to do. So I would leave you with that comment. And then the other thing that I would say is, in looking at Ingram Micro public sector, we have experts that can assist not only the government, but the robust partners we have in the prime contracting community that are working with the government, and that we work with a host of great OEM vendors like VMware that bring expertise and solutions to the cybersecurity challenges that we're facing today.
And that risk management piece, that supply chain risk management piece, it also goes right back to the visibility discussion we have. It doesn't just end at the start, right? When you vetted everything, you have to keep looking at it all to maintain that over time.
Yeah, just in closing, and again, sort of keying off something that you said, Tony, as well, is that Zero Trust is very complex, and we're here to help. VMware has probably the richest third-party ecosystem in the industry. We sort of view ourselves as the Switzerland of IT because we do integrate with all these other vendors, even some of our competitors, because it's the right thing to do for the customer. So if you combine that wide third-party ecosystem and the virtualizations, and the cloud softwares that we have, combine that with Ingram's reach into other partners and other technologies and other companies, their back reach to those and their in-depth knowledge of those, combining that with VMware, a company that sort of bills itself as being, the Switzerland of IT, it's a great combination, very powerful.
Well, I want to thank you both. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vanessa.
I'm Vanessa Roberts, and I've been talking with Tony Celeste, Executive Director and General Manager for Ingram Micro Public Sector, and Don Bailey, a Senior Enterprise Solutions Architect at VMware. To learn more about the power of technology, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Ingram Micro. Have a great day, and see you soon on Federal News Network.